Hi, I'm Dr. Stan Steindl, and welcome back to Compassion in a T-shirt, where we explore the science and practice of compassion and how it can help us live more connected, courageous, and meaningful lives. Today, we're diving into a conversation about living brave, strong, and fulfilled. And I honestly can't think of two better people to explore that with: Kathryn Wiseman and Aly Layt. Kathryn is a former GP turned life coach and soulful writer whose blog and reflections on intentional living have inspired many to step out from behind the mask and into their authentic lives. Aly is a neurocoach and founder of Bbrave Bstrong, and she brings a powerful mix of insight, energy, and science-backed strategies to help people shift from "why am I stuck" to "look where I'm going." Together, these two are an absolute powerhouse of purpose. They co-host the Brave, Strong and Fulfilled podcast, where real talk meets real growth. And they've built a vibrant community for people wanting to live more values-aligned, passion-filled lives. What Kathryn and Aly offer is grounded in compassion, the kind that doesn't just soothe, but also empowers us to live with intention and heart. And so I bring you Kathryn Wiseman and Aly Layt. Great. Well, Kathryn Wiseman and Aly Layt, welcome to Compassion in a T-shirt.
Thanks for having us, Dan. It's so good to be here.
It is. I'm so excited. Sorry, there's three of us on the screen, so I was seeing who was going to talk next.
Yeah, exactly. I know.
Yeah,
It's
thanks
going
for
to
having
be
us.
fun to sort of bounce around a little bit.
Hmm.
And actually, well, in terms of that, I thought I might just start with you, Kathryn. Well, we were just reminiscing, weren't we? We knew each other
Yeah.
2008, 2009. Our little kiddies were kind of going to primary school together and all that sort of stuff. And back then, you were a GP. And I think in the meantime, you've kind of transitioned into a sort of a coaching kind of a role. I suppose I wanted to start there. What was the pivotal moment really, or what led you to make that shift?
Thanks, Dan. Yes, so way back in 2008, that was a long time ago. I mean, we were just also reminiscing that our little kiddies that were in primary school are now 22 and 23. So,
Yes.
yes, so back in the day, you might hear from my accent, from South Africa. I was a GP, and if I'm honest, in GP land, I often found myself looking over my shoulder and wondering, what else could I be doing? And so I think already then the writing was on the wall that potentially this wasn't my lifelong career. But at the
Mm.
time, I was so focused on acceptance and approval seeking and people pleasing, and I know we'll talk about that in a moment, that in my mind I thought that this was where I had to stay, in medicine. And so when this opportunity arose for us as a family to experience Australia, we were initially only coming for 2 years. I thought this is a fantastic opportunity to take a big step back and to start asking, what else is there and what else could I be doing? And I was quite taken aback when I discovered that I didn't really know what else I wanted to do. So I was stuck in this place of, I don't mind being a GP, but I don't love being a GP, but that's all I know how to be. And, I don't know what else there is. And so then we decided, okay, we're going to stay in Australia. And so I recognized that I needed to figure this out and tried a few different things. Still couldn't work it out. Decided, it'll have to be back as GP, practicing as a GP. So sat part one of the AMC exams, but the whole time just really constantly looking over my shoulder at what else is there. And so part of our journey in Australia meant a couple of relocations. And after we finally relocated north to Townsville, a trusted friend who quickly became a trusted friend suggested, after hearing my frustration at, who do I want to be and what do I want to do? Because let's face it, it's a massive lot of work to get back into GP work in Australia, and exams and rotations and all sorts of things. With a young family and a husband doing the same, it was pretty tricky. And she suggested I go and see a life coach. And at the time, I had never heard the term. I didn't know there was such a thing as life coaching, but I trusted her. So I thought, you know what? I'm so frustrated in my world at the moment that I'm going to give this a go. So I booked a session, and very quickly I recognized that there was so much to learn here. And for the first time in a long time, this excitement started to stir on the inside. And I thought, this is phenomenal. Like, I'm learning stuff about myself in my 40s that I had no clue about. And how could I be, so far on in life and just not know these fundamentals? And so it was a no-brainer. It was just, I got home and just said to Greg, I think I know, what I want to do with my life. And so, yeah, started studying coaching as well as receiving a lot of coaching, and I've never looked back. It's just been such a great journey.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, being a GP is kind of, almost the ultimate of compassion in a way, really. It's sort of it's really identifying and being sensitive to suffering and doing things to be helpful, and so it's a very compassionate profession, and yet, yeah, there was something just there. There was something that didn't quite fit with perhaps who you wanted to be, or something like that. And it's interesting because the pivot really was when you were on the receiving end of being helped or something like that. The sort of the
Yeah, so and you know
receiving
what?
the
Yeah, and I'm glad you've touched on that, because I think what I noticed, so GP world, absolutely, the compassion involved and the caring is definitely there. However, medicine is still it's diagnostic and it's prescriptive. And
hmm
it needs to be, because there's a place for that. People come to their GP because they want to know. I mean, not always, but often it's around what's happening, what's the diagnosis, how can you help me, how can you treat this? And my line of work as a GP had a lot to do with probably what they call nowadays lifestyle medicine and, chronic health. My area was diabetes and endocrine. And I often saw the need for people to make lifestyle change that would benefit their health journey. And yet, as you know, my training was very prescriptive. And so I would prescribe, what the latest articles and journals had said, are good lifestyle changes to make. And as I was prescribing this, I could literally see the patient on the other side of the table, like this wall go up. And I could see,
mm,
like, on their face, like, I can hear what you're telling me that I need to do, but I really don't want to do that. And I don't like the diagnosis you're giving me, and I don't like where I'm, sitting right now. And something in me was just, patients would leave, and I would think, surely there's a different way to help. And
mm,
yet I didn't know what that looked like. And I think once I started my coaching journey, all these light bulbs kept going off in my head, and I kept thinking, gosh, this is it. There's so many different perspectives and different ways of approaching to help someone to come alongside on their own journey, and to figure out together, okay, so what could this look like? If you were going to start making some kind of change towards helping yourself in your health journey, what do you want that to look like? And I
mm,
also understand, the reality of being a GP. GPs don't have the time. It's often there's this time challenge in a consult, and you're there to, there's so many other things you're addressing in that short time period. And so I have had the privilege of partnering with GPs and helping patients, but from a coaching perspective, to unpack and walk those journeys, which has just been, yeah, a remarkable experience.
mm.
So
I mean, I
loved
admire
it.
GPs so much. I mean, my mum was a GP as well, and you have to
Yeah.
be across everything, like, and sort of, you
Yes.
never quite know what's going to come through the door. It's all about assessment and diagnosis, and then a treatment plan, and often all
Yes.
within 5, 10, 15 minutes, and so it's really tricky, and you kind of noticed by the sounds of it. Well, there were blocks, I guess, would arise for people, and
Yes.
you were
Yeah.
keen to think, like, how can we actually empower people? How can we be evocative? How can we really listen and have a bit of time to listen, so that we're kind of helping them move towards kind of behavior change. And a lot of GP work
Yeah.
is about behavior change, I suppose, isn't it, ultimately? And so that's sort of the magic sauce in a way, is to be able to listen such that people start to, you know, make the arguments for change themselves. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What about the
Yeah.
other way around? Do you find now that your medical background does still influence your coaching?
It certainly has been helpful. And, it's funny because back in the day when I studied medicine, we didn't know what we know now around the neuroscience of change and how our brains are so remarkable at, rewiring and changing, and that we can truly intentionally change the way we think. And but I think having a background understanding of medicine and physiology and neurology was definitely helpful. And it's, I suppose, meant that the neuroscience of change has become a passion focus of mine in the coaching
Mm.
space. So I love that the two have kind of dovetailed. And I used to, before coaching, I used to sort of say, oh, it was a mistake studying medicine, for myself. I shouldn't have studied it
Uh,
and I don't say that at all anymore. In fact, I'm so grateful to have the experience of both because they do align so well. So yeah.
yeah. Actually, that's a very lovely segue, Kathryn. Thank you to Ali, because I mean, Ali, I know you specialize in a kind of a neurocoaching approach, I think it is. And I wondered if you could, yeah, can you break some of that down for us? What's that about?
We can, yeah, absolutely can talk a little bit about it. So, neurocoaching is neuroscience, so the science of how our brain works, combined with some psychology and recognizing that there are billions of neurons in our brain, creating all of these connections and pathways in our brain. And those pathways are what help us to develop habits, to make sense of our world. They create the thoughts that we have. And when we realize that these pathways are not set in stone, I like to think of it like I'm a visual learner, Stan, and I like being outdoors. I like going walking. If I walk along a path that is cleared, it is an easy path to walk on, right? If you're out in the trails and you've got this beautiful little trail and you follow it along, our brain's like that. It's got all of these pathways in it that we trot over and we go over day after day after day. We don't even think about it. Our brain just does this automatically. It's like on autopilot most of our life. And so when we realize our autopilot or our habits or our thinking and our action isn't actually getting us where we want to go, doesn't mean we're stuck forever. We can go, oh, hang on a minute. My brain's got all of these pathways. Maybe I need to rewire and get some new pathways. And that's kind of the space where neurocoaching fits in. It's understanding a little bit about the brain and then using that knowledge to create new ways of thinking. Because if there's something that I've learned more in the last 5, 10 years of my life, is that I've realized my thoughts are not actually always very true. They're not always very helpful, and they don't get me where I want to go a lot of the time. And so I think that's part of the power of neurocoaching.
Mm. I take an approach called compassion focused therapy. I don't know if you've come across that, but one of the principles there is that we have these tricky brains that were kind of designed for us,
Mm.
not by us, in a way. That
Yeah.
it takes a bit of an evolutionary approach in that. That our brains evolved and have all of these really sort of tricky bits, and a lot of suffering really can arise from
Mm.
all of that. And like you say, we sort of tend to prefer to go down the familiar path, and we do that
Mm.
when we're going for walks, but we do, our brains kind of do that as well. But the notion too is that our brains are kind of powerful in that they can learn and change and grow as well.
Mm.
There are things we can do to, kind of really kind of manage the mind and take responsibility in a sense, and sort
Yeah.
of move in a growth direction. So tell us about that bit. I mean, how might your work sort of help people make some of those shifts or changes, and live more perhaps intentionally?
I think to start with, it's awareness of how our brain is working. Like, I had no idea when I was growing up and through my early adult years how my brain was kind of not being very resourceful, not helping me, and
Mm,
was actually becoming a barrier. So awareness, realization is the key. Unless we know that there is a different way, yeah, there's no changes that can take place. But once you realize, hey, how the brain works, and then we realize that there is choice. The story we tell ourselves is just that, it's a story. And we don't have to have the same story over and over again in our mind. And so the realization that we can have a choice. So when I work with clients, and I also have an incredible opportunity of working in a rehabilitation center and in a prison. And so
mm,
for people to realize and think, oh, this is the way it is, and they're kind of stuck and set in their ways, to realize, hang on a minute, this is how my brain works. Oh, I've got choice here, and there is a way to change it. It's a brand new way. And so when you lean into that, it gets exciting. That stirs up hope for people.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, no, cool. Awareness and choice and kind of yeah, kind of trying to cultivate that feeling of hope and optimism about, kind of
Mm.
what could be. Are there, can you give us a little feel? What would be almost like practical strategies or exercises that you might do with people to move towards choice?
A lot of the way that I work with people is through conversation, or it's through teaching to start with. It might be a teaching moment, but is asking questions and to sort of say, okay, well, if there was another choice, what could that look like? Is to present different perspectives, different alternatives. I don't know, Kath, is
Yeah.
there something that comes to your mind as a practical thing that we do
Well, I think for me,
in
what
general?
one thing that was key that I experienced in coaching that I hadn't experienced elsewhere, and Stan, just for our listeners, Ali and I trained through coaching through the same organization, so we have the same, I think, approach because of our learning in the same organization.
Mm,
It was called Neurocoaching Australia at the time, but one of the things was this experiencing a judgment-free space to
Mm.
explore and have these conversations. And I think, to open the space of being curious and let's explore and let's figure out what a different way could look like, and giving our clients space to uh, be creative without judging anything. Nothing you say is wrong or bad or silly, or it's all let's just play and put things on the table and explore and figure this out together. And I think that invitation in a safe, judgment-free space with someone who is not like, as a coach, you're not emotionally involved in the person's world, but yet you still have this desire to help them get unstuck from whatever stuckness they might feel they're in. And so you're still uh, sort of championing the way forward and the way to an outcome that's going to bring results. And I
Mm.
think what I've learned over and over around research on change is that having this safe, judgment-free space to have these conversations is so um, important in the process of change and in the process of taking that responsibility and ownership towards figuring things out
mm,
is key. So I think both
mm.
Ali and I think speak okay for us both,
Mhm.
Al, that we're that's key in the work we do.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, no, it does sound like it's in the conversation, which is sort
Mm.
of the
Mm,
key, it's being able to, well, firstly create a sort of a relational space that
Mm.
feels
yeah.
safe and non-judgmental and respectful, but kind of curiosity almost sounds like a part of it as well, just creating a
Mm.
relational space that the person feels safe to then kind of explore and think widely or laterally or exploring the different ways of thinking and approaching and the choices that can be made and sort of kind of listening in a way, but also not just sort of wholly non-directive listening. There's guiding happening there of some
Yeah.
sort, and
Yeah.
so you're sort of trying to kind of ask curious questions or listen in a way that the person has little discoveries about, kind of what to do next, something like that.
Yeah. There's something
And I
about,
think, you go, Elle.
I was just going to say, there's something about when you voice something out loud. Like, I don't know how many times I've been talking with Kath and I say it out loud. I'm like, oh, is that really what I'm thinking? Is that really the story? So it's often not necessarily about what then Kath would say back. It's having, I love it, it's that safe space where you are free to share it. And when you're free to share, you then realize it yourself a lot of the time.
Yeah,
And
love it.
that's what I love.
I love that too. A little quote. I don't even know who said it, but I know what I believe when I hear myself speak, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Is sort of at the heart of it a bit, and our job is much more of or the way you approach it. It's you're facilitating that conversation,
Yeah.
but the wisdom is arising perhaps from the person themselves.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's kind of the comment I was going to make, Stan, is that people are so resourceful. And I think even just being encouraged by somebody else that, we do have wisdom on the inside of us, and we do have the answers. And just having someone kind of backing you in that process to explore that in a safe space is key, and it's that ingredient of the conversation that helps to flow towards the outcome.
Aly,
Yeah.
you sort of, one of the core themes is about helping people move forward and sort of explore choices and make changes maybe and that sort of thing. But sort of people often can get stuck, I guess. Like what do you sort of feel well, I mean, part of it, I suppose you were sort of talking about before is that, it's just in some ways the way the brain works, is to kind of keep us doing the things that we do, even if it doesn't necessarily work that well. But like, what would you say are some of the stuck points, the challenges, the things that kind of do start to get in the way for people making these changes?
Yeah. Look, we often find ourselves stuck in all sorts of situations, stuck in relationships, stuck in a job, stuck in our responsibilities, stuck in the mundane perhaps of life and feeling bored. And something that I know, when we feel stuck, we often can't see a way out. And when we feel like we can't see a way out, we just sink further and further down. And then often we isolate. Often then it becomes a very scary place. There's a lot of fear in those places. And so the key, well, one of the big keys there is to help people to realize, in fact, we're never, ever stuck. We're never, ever without choice. But it's hard to see a choice when you're in that dark place. And so that's what the conversation is so powerful in, because when you help people to see, oh, there is a choice here. What could that choice look like? Is there a different way? If I followed that way, where does that lead? And again, I said it before, that's where hope starts to stir. And when you're not on your own and you're not isolated, feeling lonely, that you're the only one that's stuck, and you realize, hey, this is actually part of the human experience. We all experience it. That alone is powerful. I know lots of people feel like there's something wrong. They're broken. They're stuck. They can't see a way out. And when you sit beside someone in that darkness and in that stuckness, and you sit there for a bit, you hear it out, and you start to ask questions and start to get curious of, maybe if we're not stuck, how could it? What could it look like? And they don't feel like they're on their own. It can change everything.
Kathryn, Aly mentioned their fear. What I do notice that in my work that part of what can keep people stuck is kind of, threat system activation, feelings of fear or anxiety, an urge to avoid or sort of delay or procrastinate even, and things like that. I mean, what are your thoughts about fear as a stuck point or part of that, and how to to move through it?
So I think one of the things that, I mean, in medicine, we were taught about the stress response and how that plays out in different people, and it's the whole, freeze, fight, flight. But it was really interesting in the coaching space to be taught how, as humans, we are wired for safety. And I think part of the human experience is fear. We fear so many things. And I mean, I think fear has been live and healthy and well through all the generations of life. But I mean, especially, how often do we hear in the year 2025, there's so much to be fearful about. And I think understanding that we're not stuck, or we don't stay stuck because we're lazy or incapable or don't have what it takes to move forward. So even the understanding that often we stay stuck because it's actually an avoidance of fear, or it's a safety mechanism, and to explore. So, okay, so if I'm stuck because I'm trying to protect myself from something and not move forward, what am I actually trying to protect myself from? And what am I actually trying to, if fear is in here somewhere, and if fear has a role somewhere in keeping me stuck, what could that possibly be? And it's incredible when we, again, in that safe space with somebody else, uh, helping us to feel like, what, I'm not alone in this. This is actually normal. This is actually, part of life. And I can explore the fear. Often when we look at the thing that we're fearing the most, we realize that we've made it so much bigger in our head than it actually is. And so unpacking the fear and realizing, oh, actually, maybe I don't need to fear that as much, or maybe because I've got somebody else supporting me and alongside me and they believing in me, I could potentially take a step forward, even though it does feel scary. So it's recognizing fear and recognizing that it is going to be uncomfortable, and sometimes, we've got to do things scared anyway to move through that. But what if we realize that it is possible that we can, and it actually is safe to, So sorry, I see I've got a thumbs up.
Yeah, that I know Zoom does that for us. Ali, actually, yeah, something just occurred to me that it's almost like the anxiety and so on is so I'm gonna have to go back to that little bit, but for some reason someone's calling me. So Ellie, yeah, something that's just occurred to me is almost like the difference between safety and safeness, or something like that. That fear, the motivation of fear and anxiety and so on is a kind of a safety-seeking motivation. We're trying to 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 seek safety and protect ourselves, I guess, from threats and so on. Whereas the approach you take is really trying to cultivate a sense of safeness or something, that the person, especially in the conversation and in the relationship, feels safe to venture out again and to kind of maybe explore the possibilities, explore the world, sort of metaphorically. What are your thoughts there about safety versus safeness as a distinction?
I think that's a great point there that you've just made, Stan. I've seen that in conversations with people very, very clearly, where people are feeling incredibly unsafe. Their brain is showing them that they are incredibly unsafe. And when we're in that state of lack of safety, in that fearful state, we're unable to access the part of our brain that gives us any problem solving, any clarity, any way forward. And yet, safeness, when we can be in that safe place and we know and we can explore without judgment, that gives us access straight away to all of those parts of our brain that we had no access to moments before when we were worried about our safety. It's the human nature way of being to protect ourselves, and we go to it first. It's the first reaction. It's often our first response. And when we realize we're safe, like I work in this space all the time, when we realize, actually, hang on a minute, we are safe. And sometimes having that language and telling ourselves, you know what, we are safe. And we look around, we see where we are, have that conversation. We talk about all of the things that are providing us safeness, as the word you were just using.
Yeah.
And when we realize that, our demeanor, our state changes dramatically. And it's a beautiful thing to witness. The breathing changes. I mean, we can do it both ways. We can breathe when we're struggling for safety and create the safeness, but also when we are feeling safe, we naturally breathe differently as well.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
safeness comes along with sometimes a sort of a calmness or something like that. That then, when we're in a
Mm,
safety mode, the attention just narrows, doesn't it? And we're kind of focused on the threat. Whereas when we're feeling safe and we're having a safe
mm,
conversation in a safe environment, the focus opens up, and we feel calm, and we feel grounded, and we feel able to
mm,
explore.
mm.
Kathryn, you mentioned fight, flight, freeze, I think a moment ago, and sometimes they say fight, flight, freeze, fawn,
Fawn.
or appease. And I suppose you alluded right at the start to the people pleasing stuff, which is a kind of a fawn response, maybe. So I suppose, yeah, that one of the things that can feel sort of threatening is just social threat, and our social world, and people, and our
Mm,
sense of belonging, and will people be judging us, and what can I do to be approved of,
mm.
and so on. And you've written about, being a bit of a recovering people pleaser, or that sort of thing. I think I'm sort of still in the process of recovering myself. But yeah, what are your thoughts there about people pleasing, or kind of moving beyond that kind of way of being in the world?
Oh, thanks for asking that, Stan. And I think you're so right there with linking those, people pleasing as a way of, trying to appease the sense of, lack of safety. And we do often people please because we've been created for community and connection, and we want to fit in. Uh, the other side of this, though, for me, and I'm just speaking from my own experience here, is that I learned from a pretty young age. I was quite smug about it, actually. I thought, oh, I've got this superpower. And the superpower is that I can read a room and I can tell who people expect me to be. So this was the story in my
Mm.
head. I can
Hmm.
I can figure out how I'm supposed to be in this place so that I will be accepted and approved and liked. And so, I had these feelers for how could I change and be a bit of a chameleon so that I will please you so that you will like me. And cruised, well, I had an older brother who didn't quite, have, in my mind, he didn't have the same skill. So I cruised through, sort of pleasing others, where he would often sort of, have
Yes.
quite robust conversation with people. And at the time, I did think this is, how wise of me to have this skill set. And yet, what I didn't realize at all, the different perspective in it was that what if this people pleasing was actually a means of self-protection and staying safe? But it also led me down this path of not knowing much about who I was at all if I wasn't trying to be something for somebody else in order to be pleased and, to be, sorry, accepted and approved of. And I liked being, and honestly, I liked being the person that everybody likes, and the one that is so easy to get on with. And well, let's just be Kat's friend because, she's likable. And
Yes.
yet it came at a big cost.
Yeah, it's a good point, though, isn't it? Really, we don't necessarily want to throw the baby out with the bathwater in a way. Like
Yeah,
there are elements of being a good and decent person, and being able to be
yeah,
attuned to others, and to kind of
yeah,
read the room a little bit, and be able to sometimes that means not only sort of them approving of you, but you can create a sort of a social environment where people are able to connect and feel a sense of belonging, and so on. In fact, you probably brought a lot of that to your GP work. People would come in,
yeah.
they'd only get 10 minutes, but they'd quickly feel comfortable with you because you were, it was a kind of a super a power, really. And then it's a sort of, it's the other bit as well, where it becomes, um, well, kind of exhausting sometimes, and it's often driven
Yeah.
by a kind of a fearfulness, and in the end, you might lose sight of yourself. Sorry.
And I think in the coaching space, when I actually sort of discovered the downside of all of this, I did go through a season of kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and I did sort of think, oh gosh, people pleasing is not good, and I got to swing to the other way and do this whole who am I and be more assertive, and I have thankfully this journey in coaching has been almost a decade now, and I have thankfully recognized that, as with most things, there's a whole spectrum, and there's, one side and the other side. And it's where is that beautiful balance in the middle where you can still be honoring and respectful of someone and be compassionate and hear what it is that someone else perhaps needs in the moment, but yet you still can live true to who you are, live true to your values, have boundaries if you need boundaries, and not find yourself going completely off on a limb, which I often did. And, I could feel the sense of in myself, I was going, I want to say no, and I really want to say no here, but I have to say yes because, this is who I am. And so it's been a journey for sure. And so that's why I still call myself a recovering people pleaser, because I think there will always be that element in me that wants you to like me, because it's part of the human nature, I think.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I've often said that when I turned 50, I finally thought to myself, I don't care what anyone else thinks anymore. And not quite. It's not quite. I didn't get the whole way, but maybe, sort of a little bit there. Ali, one of the things that Kath mentioned there actually was the notion of values, really, isn't it? I suppose, being able to have a sense, like what are my values? What's important to me? How can I kind of create, just little boundaries around some of that so that it helps to guide the responding in a way with others, like what's okay and what's not okay sort of thing, and where's the boundary there? And often values can help us with sort of understanding all of that. What are your thoughts there about values aligned living and ways that people can sort of bring that into their daily life?
That's a good question. I've noticed in my own life, and I've noticed in plenty of other people who I've, known or worked with, that we often find ourselves living in a way that has some sort of conflict. We feel this inner conflict, and we do things we don't want to do, and we don't do the things that we do want to do. And that
Mm.
is something that I've heard time and time again. It's something I've experienced time and time again. And so on this journey of coaching, I've realized that if I want to eliminate some of that conflict and have more of peace inside of me, what that means is, firstly, I need to recognize we all have needs. I've got needs as a human being. We all have these core needs. They are pretty standard across all of the world. We've got core needs. And the conflict that we're experiencing is when how we want to show up in life and how we want to do life, yet our needs aren't being met. So we're meeting our needs. There's a conflict there. So if we've got I'm just trying to think of an example off the top of my head, not very
Mm.
clear at the moment, but the conflict is in that moment. And so when we can recognize what our values are, so what is important to us, we can then use those things that are important to meet our needs.
Mm.
Yeah, so that's why I think it's important to know our values. So years ago, if someone said to me, Al, what do you value? What's your values? I'd be like, my what the? Like, what's value? I don't know. But the more I realize that we've all got plenty of values, and sometimes they conflict with each other. An example I was sharing with Kathryn actually is one that's going to be in conflict today. I like healthy eating. My husband likes eating at a particular pub for lunch on a hot day, which is where we're going today. And I know he's going to want to eat waffle fries. And I know that he would think it's fun spoilerish if I don't share some of the waffle fries with him.
Right. Yeah.
So for me, so living according to values sometimes, and people pleasing, if we know our values, sometimes it's not to people please to please my husband to eat the waffle fries. But it's going, you know what, I value our relationship and I value our time together. I value that more than perhaps what I'm going to put in my mouth, so I can avoid that conflict I feel it in my gut. I feel that conflict in my gut. What am I going to do? I don't know if that answered your question, Stan.
Two really useful bits there. I mean, the first bit actually, I haven't really conceptualized it like this before, but in a way, yes, we have these needs, and we have certain needs that may or may not be met in our lives and so on. And sometimes what we default to is ways that might sort of quickly or comfortably or something like that meet the need.
Yeah.
And then we forget or something like that, that there might be unintended consequences that goes along with that too, you know, and so we've kind of met the need, but we kind of haven't, in a funny sort of a way. And that when we bring values to those choices and those actions, and we have a clear sense of ourselves and our identity and what's important to us, and we let those values kind of guide us, then we meet the need still, but in a way that's sort of more permanent or fulfilling or kind of actualizing in our lives. So that's a really great concept. The second thing you said too is really, really tricky. You know, like we can have equally legitimate values that are in conflict with each other. You know, the one for me, which is often a curious one, is, you know, kind of kindness and authenticity, say. You know, like I really feel like kindness is an important part of life and who I would want to be, but I want to be true and real and, you know, true to myself in a sense, and authentic and so on. And sometimes to be kind, you have to kind of be a bit less authentic, and sometimes to be authentic, you might say things that people struggle with. I mean, Kath, what are your thoughts there in terms of, you know, values and finding our way through those little nooks and crannies?
Well, I'm smiling here because as you're sharing, I'm like, oh, Stan, I can so relate exactly to that. And I think, you know, you've said kindness and versus authenticity. And I suppose that's where some of the people pleasing came in for me versus authenticity. And I remember when we were doing this work on discovering our needs, you know, one of the needs we all have as humans, and sorry, I'm probably not answering your question, Kelly, but one of the needs is the need for significance. And I was having a coaching session, and my coach picked up the fact that I was, you know, how language is so important. And I was interchanging the word significance and performance. And he sort of sat back and said, oh, that's curious. So I'm just wondering, is significance and performance, like, you know, are they the same? Are they different? And so immediately my response was, well, of course they're the same. You know, you've got to perform to be significant. And then had one of those, you know, Aly moments like, did I just say that? And gosh, is that really true? Like, what do I really think about that, you know? And so then unpacking the value of performance for me. And I think what I realized in being such a people pleaser when it came to trying to figure out my values, the biggest struggle I had personally was I try to unpick what's a good value to have because that makes me a good person. And people, you know, it's a people pleasing kind of approach to trying to work out my values. Versus actually, if I can sit here, and what was really, really helpful was a strategy from Tony Robbins, actually, where he talks about doing an exercise where nobody else sees what you're writing. He calls it for your eyes only. And so that's actually how I, you know, like third, fourth, fifth time round approach trying to work out what my values was. I sort of thought, okay, if nobody else is going to ever read what I'm going to write down on this piece of paper, I've got full responsibility, you know, full permission, sorry, to answer and to figure out my values. And it was such a funny experience because I'd write stuff down on the paper and think, oh, I feel so squirmish writing this down. This feels like, you know, I don't want anybody to see this. Made me realize how steeped I was in trying to perform and impress and get the answers right. So even trying to work out your values from a standpoint of, you know what, I'm not going to be judged. No one else is going to say that's a right or wrong value to have or a good or bad value to have. You know, I needed to go right back there and give myself permission just to be completely honest. You know, for Kath, what's important? And I'd never done that before because it was always about, well, what's Dan going to think about what I put down as what's important?
Yeah, no, that's the self-conscious emotions. They're never far away, are they? That sense of how am I being held in the minds of others, and it sort of infiltrates our thinking about our own values. I think that's a really
Yeah.
nice point, and so we end up with a whole wonderful set of values that are a little bit other focused in the end, like and we can neglect even things like self-care, for example, as a sort of an important value that we might try to sort of add to things. And if we're given that, again, that safeness, that permission to explore our values for self, that can be a really important piece. Ali, you did say the power of people expressing their thoughts and putting things into words. How much do you go into the nitty gritty of what Kath just alluded to? Like like literally the choice of words that people make along the way. Is that, are you sort of listening out for that example was significance versus performance? But I can imagine that there must be a wealth of information when you start to really listen to the words people choose.
100%. You nailed it. Everything, language is everything. At first it's a thought, it becomes the language, and then we've created this state, this way of being. And if we can grab hold of the language that's being used and challenge it, I know Kath's really good at it. When she's coached me, she questions the words I've used. I'm like, hang on a minute, what am I really meaning here? You know, but the moment we challenge our
Mm,
thoughts, the language that we're using, it has a
mm,
completely different we can end up with a completely different state just by using different words.
mm. Yeah.
Even though we're in the same problem, even though the circumstances haven't changed, changing the language, we feel vastly different. So yes, it's a very important space. And
Mm,
it's one of the challenges in the early days of coaching was for me getting caught up in people's story. So they've got this big story and I hear the story and I'm like, and I can get pulled into the story. But the moment I don't get caught up in the story and hear the language, that's where the power is. That's where you can go, oh, that's interesting. You use the words significance and performance. Is it the
yeah.
same thing? And that's when you have the light bulb moments.
Yeah, yeah, even just the real subtle things like, should versus could or something, like little things
Yeah.
like that. And if you can kind of tune your ears to hear the word choice and what it might mean, you can just reflect it back and suddenly
Mm.
people are thinking, is
Mm.
that what I mean, sort of thing. And they can clarify for themselves really as much
Yeah.
as for somebody else. Kath, the other thing that you've alluded to a couple of times is your own coaching and being coached. What are your thoughts about the benefits of that for the coach themselves? Like does that it seems to sort of offer a lot of insights that you're then able to bring to your own work as a coach. So yeah, what are your thoughts there?
So I'm going to quote now from one of our trainers who's a master certified coach, and he's
Okay.
also on the International Coaching Federation board. Fabulous man, lives in Brisbane, Dr. Mark Sitch. And he always used to say to us, as a coach, you coach out of the overflow of your own personal development. So
Right.
how important
Yes.
it is as a coach to go on the coaching journey as a coaching client yourself and to experience the change and the learning from becoming more aware and being open to shifted perspectives, practicing state change, how your change of state actually changes a way of being. And so I think it's hugely important in this work as a coach I mean, I had a coaching session yesterday, actually. A coach that I worked with ages ago, I'd come up to another challenge in my life because that's life. There's
Mm,
always challenges coming up. And so my first go-to at this stage is even if I don't feel particularly stuck or I don't feel particularly because coaching's not therapy, so it's not like I need therapy, but when I find myself looping in my head about something and I'm trying to work it out and it's going around in circles, I know, you know what? a conversation with somebody else who can do this backwardsing and forwardsing, and they can hear things I'm not hearing. They can ask me questions I'm not asking myself. The value in that has just been phenomenal.
Mm. Is there a kind of a sort of a sort of disentangling where receiving your own coaching informs your work as a coach, and not assuming that your own experience of being coached is how others would need to experience it? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, yes, yeah. And that we get trained on that all the time in our
Mm.
coaching training about how that is definitely can become a bit of a blind spot, I suppose, as a coach, and the not to assume anything. So part of our training when we come into a session to work with people is to not assume that their experience of coaching is going to be the same as my experience of coaching, or and in fact, how challenging it is sometimes when people bring whatever they're bringing to the coaching table as a client is so close to like my own personal experience as a coach. I can so easily move into that space of, I know exactly what's going on for you here, but rather not assuming that and asking the client more questions to try and gain more clarity and being curious about where they're from, and also not assuming that just because I needed XYZ when I was in that same space, that the client needs that. So absolutely, it's a sort of something that's always in the background there. And I don't always get it right.
Mm.
Sometimes I come out of a coaching session and I think, gosh, I made that all about me, when it's actually all about the client. But the awareness of it again is the starting
Mm.
point. So.
Yeah. Yeah, so we sort of begin with the sort of the education aspect of the coaching. There's that sense of really creating safeness and non-judgment and acceptance, and the relational part, and then there's this conversation that explores some of the blocks, or that sort of thing, and the
Mm.
barriers, and kind of helps the person to discover their way through some of those barriers, guided a bit by values, and a sense of values for self, values for others, and kind of gradually things start to open up. So Kathy, you've created the Brave, Strong, and Fulfilled, or you and Aly have developed this the
Mm.
podcast, I think, and so I was keen to hear about that. What inspired you both to do that, or like what's the vision there for the podcast?
Stan, these are great questions. And yeah, it's given us great reflection to kind of, think about this again. And I love the fact that you've got the word compassion and then motivation on your t-shirt.
Yes.
So part of my coaching journey is I've trained in this tool called motivational mapping that helps us to
Mm.
understand our own, like it's good to understand your own personal values, also having clarity around, what it actually is that motivates us, to act in certain ways and to be, and one of my key motivators that I've discovered through this process was to add value and make a difference. So, and I was trying to sort of ponder what that could look like, because not everybody wants one-on-one coaching, for sure. Not everybody needs one-on-one coaching. And yet there were so many things that I was so excited to share because of the journey. And so I sort of thought, what could a podcast look like? And then immediately my brain went to, that's just way too hard. And, what could I possibly think up to say and talk about on my own? So, and I've discovered that conversation is a lot easier. And I know on your podcast, Dan, you interview a lot of people, so there's that conversation. And I just thought, well, what if I could find a buddy that we could have conversations together to, in a more sort of real life conversational way, share about, real life journeys and what we're learning and how coaching impacts the struggles a lot of us have. And without a doubt, Aly popped up in my mind. So I asked Al what she thought, and Aly, I'll let you share this this part of the
What
story.
happened next, Aly?
Kath didn't know this. I was on a journey of saying, looking for opportunity, going, what's next for me? So I was on a journey of saying yes to things. Then one day on our walk, Kath just said, "Hey, Al, do you want to do a podcast with me?" And I had nothing else to say but yes. I had to say yes. I'd said at the beginning of the year, this is the year of yes. And so then I said yes to Kath. And literally, I think it was like the next week, Kath, we like booked a studio and we had no idea, Stan, what we were doing. We didn't know how to do a podcast. We didn't know how to use any of the equipment. We didn't know what we were going to, at that stage, we didn't even know what we were going to call ourselves, but we booked on in and we decided that trying to get all the answers to the questions would just create all these barriers. And so we just dove head on in. And I would say over the last, how long has it been? Nearly 2 years.
Yeah, nearly 2
years.
Yeah.
And it's been the most inspiring, the most encouraging thing I think I've been doing, really, because I get to have these conversations with Kath pretty much every week. And we unpack life. We don't, we try not to overshare, but our little subtitle is Real Life with Kath and Aly. We want to talk about life, things that matter to us, and then how coaching has impacted us. Because it's a coaching conversation a lot of the time between Kath and I.
Yeah. I'm impressed that you, right from the start, booked a studio. That's very cool. I want to do something like that.
It was lots of fun.
Yeah.
We felt cool, Stan. Very cool.
Yeah. No, that's one of the fun things, isn't it? Is, playing with tech, I guess. But yeah, it took a kind of, well, sort of a courage to do it, like you had made a conviction to say yes to things. Sorry, Kat.
And at the time, no, I'm just saying at the time it was so funny because this was about, I think it was about the February of 2024. No, what 2023. 2023, yeah. And I had no idea at that time that we would relocate to Adelaide in the July. And had I known in the February, March that we were going to relocate in July, I would have at that point said, oh, this is not going to work. This is going to be too hard. Why even start something if I know we're going to be moving? But we had jumped in and we had started and we were just having so much fun that when I said to Al, oh, I've got some news, we're relocating. The very next thing we both sort of said was, oh, we're going to make this work. We're going to keep going. And thankfully, we don't need a podcast studio. We can just do as we're doing today over Zoom and it works. So it's been a joy. Definitely has.
Yeah. Aly, what's do you recall a particular episode or a particular conversation that sort of stands out for you or that was sort of meaningful in its own way?
Honestly, I don't have a particular one because nearly every conversation I have a light bulb moment. Kath will just ask me, and you'll often, because we're on YouTube, I think if you look at it, you'll go, oh, that's where Al's light bulb, because my face will tell the story.
Okay.
And I'll be like, she'll just ask something, and I'm like madly trying to get my thoughts together. And because Kathryn is a great questioner, however you say that, what's the language? But she is. And so I feel challenged every time, but I feel inspired just by having the conversation. And that's how I know coaching is so powerful. Having it's just a conversation. So no, I don't have a favorite one, but everyone that's got the light bulb moment where you'll see my face madly trying to work out what's going on. Yeah,
yes.
I've been challenged.
I'll have to check it out on YouTube. I'd mainly listen to things on the podcast, but now I know it's on YouTube as well. I'll look for those those wide-eyed moments from Aly where she's like,
oh no, hang on.
I've just realized something.
Oh, and if truth be told, Aly does the same with me. So, she'll ask something and I'll say something along the lines of, gee, Al, that's a great question to buy some time to kind of consider the answer. So a lot of the time we're on the fly, just with, we know the thing we want to bring to the conversation, and then we just, go with however it unfolds. So
I suppose I used the word courage a moment ago, and it's it is it's a sort of it's a bit of an emotional risk to do these things. We're
Yeah.
sort of not sure, and it takes a kind of an emotional courage to do that. What would you sort of say to someone who
Mm.
perhaps is a bit struggling with self-doubt or feels a bit fearful or has those self-conscious emotions? Like what would you say there about the courage to take action or to make a change?
Well, for me, the biggest encouragement has been some of the feedback we've had from our listeners is that, it just feels like, well, first of all, it feels like they say it feels like we're talking to friends or we're listening to friends around a coffee table. So, it's just real. It's just as friends would talk. But then also, I've had people emailing me and say, thank you so much because you've normalized what I'm thinking. You've helped me to feel like what I'm thinking is okay and that it's actually quite normal. And so I think to give any listeners courage, if you're struggling with courage, is to sort of give yourself permission to not need to have it perfect, to not need to know the answers, to not uh, need to always be right. Like it's the whole performance. You don't have to perform to be significant. It's just show up and people have
Mm.
really appreciated, I think, the fact that we have, without necessarily oversharing, that we've just been so real and vulnerable in a way.
Mm.
Yeah, no,
Agreed.
that's there's a couple of things there. Like I suppose the way I might conceptualize that from the approach that I take is that we've got the drive system that has sort of aspirations and we want to sort of achieve things and so on, but it can get a little bit social comparison, social rank, kind of where do I sit in the hierarchy of people. It can sort of get a little bit kind of focused in on all of that, which then kind of activates a bit of threat system. But
Mm.
bringing kind of soothing system, affiliative system into play where you can, well, firstly, like you said, it's kind of fun, really, was, you were able to approach this challenge, but kind of really see and connect with the fun of it. But also, kind of doing it together. It seems like that's a
Yeah.
really big part of it, that sense of connection and sort of togetherness and tackling this thing, but with our sidekick, by our side or
Yeah.
something like that, and that if we can activate that soothing affiliative system, then we can access a kind of a courage and a strength and a kind of determination to do the things that really
Mm.
inspire us or feel good.
Yeah. I
I love
remember
that
years
language. You
ago,
nailed it. Yeah.
yeah, I was going to say the same. Absolutely did nail it, Stan, because you've reminded me years ago, I heard somebody say to do things afraid. Do it
Mm,
afraid. And it never occurred to me that people were doing, really cool things in the world, but they were still afraid to do it. Like they still felt
mm.
that same feeling that I felt. And so I kind of lived quite small. I sort of had all these ideas and things I kind of wanted to do with my life, but because I felt afraid or because I didn't think I was good enough and all of those beliefs that you have, lived quite small. And I remember just realizing one day, we've got one life and I want to enjoy it. And so that's where the whole, you know what, I don't want to look foolish and get it all wrong. But even if I do, if I'm enjoying it and I'm living my best life and I'm encouraging people along the way, it's probably worth it. Um, so I just think
Beautiful.
it's exciting to live big, do it afraid, be courageous. Might not work, but hey, it just might as well. And you might encourage somebody on their journey. So, mm.
Well, I actually think that's a beautiful place to bring our conversation to a close. Thank you, Ali, for those very inspiring final words. And yeah, but thank you both of you for well, what you're doing in the podcast, and I'll definitely include the links to your various bits and pieces in the description below, as they say, and and but also yes, Kathryn Wiseman and Aly Layt, thank you very much for coming on Compassion in a T-shirt.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
It's been
Dan.
an
It's been
absolute
wonderful.
pleasure.